Welcome to Healing Your Families. I'm Emmalou Penrod, and I help you as a parent go from frustration, stress, and overwhelm to calm, confidence, and joy so that you can achieve the quality of family life that you desire. Today, I want to talk about liberty and responsibility and how these two words are connected, how they're related. So let's make sure we're very clear on definitions to begin with. And when we talk about liberty, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, liberty has three definitions. The first is the condition of being free from confinement, servitude, or forced labor. The condition of being free from oppressive restriction or control by a government or other power, and a right to engage in certain actions without control or interference by a government or other power. And then according to Cambridge Dictionary, responsibility is something that is your job or duty to deal with. So how are they related? I would like you to consider this possibility, this idea, that the only way you can have total liberty is when you accept total responsibility for your life, your actions. Now, sometimes we say things like, that person really makes me angry, or my kids are driving me crazy, or they really pressured me into that. But consider that when you think like that or make that decision, you're actually giving away some of your power. Another situation I've seen frequently is when someone decides to stop going to a church or being part of a social group. Maybe they were an active member, part of that group, and then they leave, and they say their reason for leaving is because someone in that group said or did something that offended them, and now they just can't be part of that anymore. Well, I invite you to think, so when someone does that, are they actually giving control over that part of their life to someone else? They're letting someone else decide their level of involvement. Can someone else really offend you? So as we consider this and the definitions we've just gone through of liberty and responsibility, I want to tell you about the life of Viktor Emil Frankl. And he was an Austrian psychiatrist and psychotherapist. And he lived in the last century in Austria. And he was a Jew during that time when Germany occupied Austria and impacted his liberties in several ways. He and his first wife were one of the last few Jewish couples that were permitted to marry. However, Jews were not allowed to have children, even if they were married. So when his wife became pregnant, the government mandated that the child had to be aborted. And eventually, in 1942, Victor was arrested, his parents, his wife, his brother, and he spent 3 years of his life in 4 different concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and I think we've all heard stories about what happened there. So this was not only, he was separated from his family. He was deprived of adequate food and clothing and shelter and medical care. He was severely abused and mistreated. And at one point, after this was over, he survived. In fact, he lived until 1997. And he wrote over 30 books and contributed greatly to this field of psychology. And his theory was logotherapy, the concept that we are in charge of our lives. So at one lecture he gave after the war, he made the following statement. He said on how he survived this horrific experience. He said, "I repeatedly tried to distance myself from the misery that surrounded me by externalizing it. I remember marching one morning from the camp to the work site, hardly able to bear the hunger, the cold, and pain of my frozen, festering feet, so swollen. My situation seemed bleak, even hopeless. Then I imagined that I stood at a lectern in a large, beautiful, warm, and bright hall. I was about to give a lecture to an interested audience on psychotherapeutic experiences in a concentration camp." By the way, that was a title he actually used. "In the imaginary lecture, I reported the things I am now living through. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, at that moment I could not dare to hope that someday it was to be my good fortune to actually give such a lecture." So, that's the end of the quote. But even though he went through those extreme hardships and so much was taken away from him, he still kept the liberty that he could. And he took responsibility for his thoughts and his actions. I mentioned he wrote 30 books. His most famous book is Man's Search for Meaning. And he dictated that book in 9 days. One of the quotes from that book is, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." So he had those 3 years to study human behavior, and he noticed that some men gave up and died, and some became bitter and angry, and some continued to go around the camp, bringing comfort and ease to other inmates, being kind, giving away their last piece of bread. So another quote he had is, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." And that is what he did. And that is how he got through that horrific situation. Now that's really extreme, but let me give you an everyday example. Suppose that you are a young mother getting ready to go to work. And on your way to work, you need to drop off your children, some at the school, some at a daycare facility. But there is a time crunch. You need to keep on schedule. So your children are up, they're dressed, and they're in the kitchen eating breakfast. So right now, it's looking good, you just might make it. You leave the kitchen for a few minutes to go grab your car keys and other materials you need for work. And then as soon as you come back into the kitchen, you see that your 3-year-old tried to pour himself a glass of milk, and it's spilled all over the table and it's running down on the floor. Now in that space, that's the stimulus. That's what you see. You see that spilled milk all over the place. And of course you know that you're about to leave the house for several hours. Just leaving it there is not an option. So in that space, consider two different possible thoughts. The first thought is, why now? Why me? Why today? Why couldn't he wait for one of his older siblings to help him? Now I've got this horrible mess. This is the last thing I need. And the second thought could be, this is a milestone. He just whines and waits for people to do things for him. He's finally starting to do things for himself. This needs to be celebrated. This is great. Two completely different thoughts. Now let's take it forward from there, from these thoughts. We often wonder, where do our emotions come from? But the reality is they come from our thoughts. It isn't the spilled milk that causes the emotional response. It's your perception of, or your thought about the spilled milk that results in the emotions you feel. So going with the first thought, this is the worst thing that could happen. This is a disaster. Thoughts like that will most likely lead to feelings of frustration, anger. And when you're feeling those kind of things, what do? Well, you might furiously grab a rag and be scolding the children all the time and just ranting about how awful this is. Now take the second thought. This is something to celebrate. This is progress. A thought like that would lead to feelings of excitement, happiness, joy. This is good news. So those types of feelings would result more in behavior of, way to go, good for you. Maybe next time just fill it half full. It would become a teaching moment. Maybe you'd grab several rags and have everybody help clean it up while you're celebrating. This is good. Now we know you can do it. And consider the impact on the tone of your home before you leave to start your day. Whether it's stressful and angry and full of recrimination, or whether it's a happy, joyous event. Think about the difference between those two thoughts. It's really huge. Remember that our thoughts lead to our emotions. Our emotions cause our behavior, and our behavior brings us the results we get. When we change our thoughts, we can change our life. So let's talk about the liberties you have as a parent. For the most part, you have the opportunity to make the choice. You have to decide whether or not you will become a parent, whether or not you'll have children. Granted, in some situations, like the situation for Viktor Frankl and his young wife Tilly, they were in a political situation that they were not allowed to keep their child. Their child was aborted. And there are those cases where people want a child, but they face the issue of infertility. On a side note, in 2 weeks, join me in 2 weeks, because I will be interviewing Daniel and Juliet Owen Nuttall. And they are specialists in infertility. They'll tell their amazing story. But their episode will be 5 ways to boost fertility naturally in 2 weeks. So, for the most part, we have this opportunity to choose, and some parents choose adoption. And then we choose this because we know it brings problems and challenges, but it also brings rewards. Now, speaking as the mother of adult children, I want to talk about the rewards. I've done several things in my life, but none has been as satisfying as raising children, being a mother. I marvel that even though they grew up in the same home, in the same environment, as they became adults and made a life for themselves, they created a family, a home that suits their personality. They found a companion, and of course that companion has a large impact on how they order their home. But it is around their desires, their interest, and their goals. And it's very rewarding to witness your adult children making lives for themselves, setting goals, moving towards them, giving back to society, serving others. It's very rewarding. In order to attain that liberty of having that reward, there is certain responsibility that needs to be assumed. Obviously, when you take on that opportunity of parenthood, you also take on the responsibility to provide the nurture and care that your children need. And keep your mind focused on that goal of raising an independent, self-sufficient, resilient, successful adult. So when it comes to providing for their children, there really is quite a range. And it's easy for parents to get so caught up in, I want the best for my children, I want them to have more than I had, so they'll have the best clothes, the newest toys, the latest technology. And the caution is that we can become so focused on giving them material things because we love them that we actually limit their ability to become that independent, resilient adult. In some cases, they can become entitled. They may develop the attitude they don't need to work for it or earn it because their parents owe it to them. And some parents have found to their dismay that giving too much in terms of material goods has backfired on them. And some parents feel guilty and beat themselves up because they can't give their children as much as they want to give their children. Let me assure you that if you are providing your children with adequate food, shelter, as safe an environment as you can provide for them, stability, consistency, structure that helps them grow, learn, and develop and into responsible people. And most importantly, your love, your care for them, your nurturing, your belief in them, that positive energy. If you're doing that, you are giving your children all they need. They really don't need the latest gadgets and the latest fashions and all the frills and extras. Now, you also have that responsibility to educate your child. Again, keeping in mind that goal of the independent adult you want to see your child become. You want to make sure they're getting the education they need to prepare them for that. Now, every parent can teach their children all they know. You have at least 20, 30 years experience, more experience than your child. So you can share the benefit of that experience with them. You can teach them what you know. And then as you feel that there's more that they want to learn, there's extended family, neighbors, you can help them find ways to get the knowledge that they want and need for the kind of life they want to live. Now, in many countries like the United States, the government provides a public school system funded by taxpayers. And that is an option to use to send to aid in your child's education. Going back to our statement that total liberty is only available when we take total responsibility, again, the caution is you're not turning over this part of your child's life to someone else, the federal government or a school. You maintain responsibility for their education, becoming involved. If you're sending them to a public school, volunteer, support the teacher in the education of your child. Be aware of what they're learning, add to it. Form a cohesive team with personnel at the school. And be aware of the educational settings that are available where you live. Here in the United States, in addition to the public school system, there are a number of private schools. There are charter schools. Charter schools are part of the public school system. They're funded by tax dollars. But they have a different focus. And they're not under all of the same restrictions that a public school is. In some cases, a charter school is a better fit. And there are some communities where parents form a co-op and together they educate their children. And some parents educate their children at home. But knowing your child and how they learn best, what's best for them. Some children thrive in the structure of the public school. Some children need a little more latitude. Knowing your child, being involved in their education, making sure you found the best setting for them and that you're part of that team supporting their educational growth is huge and reaps great rewards of helping in that final goal. Remember, as parents, we're working ourselves out of a job. So how do we teach this concept to our children? How do we teach them how to have full liberty by taking full responsibility? Well, think about that process. You start out with an innocent, helpless little babe that needs you to do everything for them. But as they grow and mature, you can allow them growth experiences, like letting your toddler pour their own milk and learn how to do it safely and without making a mess. As they get older, they learn to dress themselves. They learn how to manage their personal hygiene. They learn responsibility for school assignments, or they become an active part of their own education and setting goals for themselves. As they get older, maybe they are given more liberty to go play at a friend's house. Maybe when they're teenagers, they want to have a part-time job or drive a car. And you as their parent, who know them better than anyone else, you're teaching them that they earn these increased privileges, this more liberty, as they demonstrate their responsibility. Giving a child a privilege or a liberty before they have developed the responsibility to handle it can have disastrous results. I think driving a car is probably the most threatening and concerning part of growing up for many parents. Here in the United States, teenagers can get a driver's license when they're 16 years old. I understand in Europe and other countries it's more like 18 or 21. But here in the United States it's 16. That's while they're still in high school. Now, I spent over 10 years as a teacher at a large public high school. There were 1,800 students. And as nearly as I can remember, every school year, there was at least one car fatality involving a young teenage driver Usually they hadn't had their license. They had their license for less than a year. And sometimes it was lack of experience, and sometimes it was poor judgment. In one case, it was two boys trying to race a train to get through the railroad crossing. They didn't make it. In another case, some students decided to take a long lunch break during school, and they went joyriding up in the mountains nearby, and they didn't slow down for the treacherous curve in the road, and they went over the edge. And their parents had to get that phone call that no parent wants to get, informing them that not only was their child not in school as they thought, but they wouldn't be coming home. Now these are graphic examples, but I want to drive home the point that we're teaching our children that balance between responsibility and liberty through our interactions with them. We teach them this is the responsibility that is required before you have earned this privilege or this liberty. And so they earn it by gaining our trust, by demonstrating that they can follow the family structure. They can keep the curfew. They can show respect for us and for other people. Now, I want to end on a more positive note with this: should teenagers be able to drive at 16? And share the story of my granddaughter. In her senior year of high school, she kept up all her grades, did well in school, but she also was completing courses at a cosmetology school and working part-time at her father's grocery store. And she could not have done that without access to a car and a driver's license. So she was demonstrating very responsible use of that liberty of having a driver's license and a car to drive in. Again, it's so individual. As parents, we remain closely connected with our children and teaching them, helping them understand as they develop greater responsibility, they earn greater liberty. Now, this is a concept that benefits society. All of us, we learn it as parents. We teach it to our children. And we share it with society. Another quote from Viktor Frankl is, "Freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it is lived in terms of responsibleness. That is why I recommend that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast." And I don't know if you've heard of the Statue of Responsibility, but it is being built. It is, right now the project artist has already built a prototype. His name is Gary Lee Price, and it consists of a pair of clasp hands oriented vertically. So it's conveying that we have the responsibility to lift each other, to serve each other, and make the world a better place by lifting each other. It's a beautiful concept. You can look it up and Google it. It's really quite interesting to see this rendition and to learn about this project. This connection between liberty and responsibility. We gain liberty when we take responsibility for our lives, no matter what situation we're in. We always have that space, that ability to choose our response. I invite you to go to my website, healingyourfamilies.com, and get my ebook, Power Parents. You can find that information on my website. Now, are you concerned about your child's negative thoughts? Are you kind of worried about some of their thinking and wondering what you can do about that? Well, over 45 years ago, a woman named Joan Golding developed a process. She calls it sleep talk, or the Golding process. And it's a non-invasive way to help your child become healthier, happier, and more resilient. And I recently became a foundation coach in her program, and I'm scheduling a webinar for Wednesday, May 25th. It'll be at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you go to my website, healingyourfamilies.com, and click on the Services tab, you can get more information on the website and sign up for it. You can also email me at emmalou@healingyourfamilies.com. So thank you for joining us this week. Please join us again next week at the same time. And next week, Carla Italiano will be my guest. Carla is a former engineer with a master's degree. She began her network marketing journey in 2007, and she has now been recognized as a top global leader in action, six-figure income earner, and top achiever. She empowers busy people to live out their full potential in health, wealth, and life, with success in network marketing, corporate America, and as a stay-at-home mom of 3 girls, one of whom overcame a cancer diagnosis. And that'll be the bulk of our conversation, is helping her young daughter through this threat of cancer. Her topic will be hard choices now equals more choices later. So until then, love yourself, love your families. We're making the world a better place by strengthening families, one family at a time. This is Emmalou Penrod at healingyourfamilies.com.